So in this video we will talk about F5 and how you can use F5 big IP for load balancing, which is LTM, local traffic management, and NAT64 LTM. F5 can be downloaded for trial, and once you open an account with their website and download the F5 big IP, you'll have to get the licenses, which they will email it to you, and then those licenses would need to be installed once you bring your F5 up. I'm running this F5 on a VMWare Player. So because there's an option for download for OVF, so I downloaded the OVF and imported it. Once you imported it, let it sit there because it takes time to come up. And the setup that I have is right here. I've got a VOS that's connected on 10.1.1.3, and F5's interface is connected on 10.1.1.10. This is interface 1.2. This is interface 1.1. And on the other side, so this is basically my data center side, which has two servers. Server 1 is a VOS, and server 2 is a VOS, basically enabling SSH. So what we are testing is how we can load balance from F5 to these servers, and we're just using SSH. And this is what you need to know to test out SSH for load balancing. So once you install the F5, you will log into its console, and you would go through the login process. Your root is your credential, and your default password is, I believe, default, and it will prompt you to change the password. So your password is going to be changed to whatever you change it. That password by default gets changed for admin as well. So keep a note on that. Whatever password you change for root becomes an admin. Admin is used for web, GUI, and root is used for CLI. The only time you would need a CLI is to check the management IP or configure it. So let's quickly look at the console, and this is how the F5 console looks like. Once you log in, you would say list. You have to go to, you will by default get into the config mode. You'll have to type in tmch, their shell, and then type in list system management IP, and that's the IP that I have. If you need to change that, and this is going to be on your virtual local host. So if you go to the virtual VMware Workstation Player and go to Manage and Virtual Machine Settings, your first interface, which is this guy, first, I've added like 4, but your first network adapter would need to be on VM1, which is host only, VMNet1 host only. That's where your IP is going to be pingable or reachable from your local host. So 192.168.71.128 is right here. This is the subnet. 71.1 is my Windows, and it's on VMware Network Adapter VMNet1. Once you make sure that this is working, ping 198, 192, 168, 71.128, we're reaching the F5 management interface. You can type create sys management IP to give it an IP. But I've already done that, and so this is what it is, or it's just going to take it if it's on the right adapter. Once you do this, this is about all you need on the CLI. Then you would configure your V1, V2 as servers on a network, on VM network N1, let's just say in my case, and N3 on this side. So N1 and N3, keep that in mind, and we go and check the F5's interfaces. This guy is on N1, the first one, which is 1.1. So this guy right here. And the second one is on N3, N1 and N3, the first and second one. So the first one is 1.1, second one is 1.2. 1.2 is N3. So coming back to our diagram, this is N3 1.2, this is N1 1.1. Let's go to the, once you have this IP connectivity, you can go into your web GUI, log in, and once you log in, you'll see this. You're going to have to first insert the license key. It'll walk you through that. That's pretty straightforward. Once you have the license key, it's pretty straightforward. After that, before you go to the network, you're going to have to go to System, and then you're going to have to go Resource Provisioning. And make sure that you have provisioned and licensed LTM, which is by default there. In my case, I'm also doing CG-NAT, so you need, if you want to do that, you can also go and provision that. Once you have configured this, a word of caution, the F5 takes a while to come up. If it's not letting you log in, just sit for let it sit for 5 minutes, or around that time frame, based on how quick is your CPU. I am providing, let's see, what's my configuration here. I am providing 4 GB of memory and 4 CPUs, and it still took me, and my CPU is around 2 GB. So it still took me around 5 minutes before I could log into the web for the first time when it comes up. But once that is done, it's pretty smooth after that. Once the licensing is done and the provisioning is checked, you can see it's licensed and LTM is nominal. You have multiple options. I just took the default one. Once you have this going, the first step to configure your setup is to go to the network and then go to the VLANs. And in the VLANs, you'll create 2 VLANs based on our setup. First one is external, and the other one is internal, because these are our data center servers, and this is the external client, right? So once you do that, once you have that picture in your mind, you're going to say whatever name you want to give. You're going to go create. Once you do create, let's just say client facing v3. You give whatever name you want, and then keep everything by default here. You're going to choose the external facing, which was the first one, 1.2, sorry, and add it. So it's going to add, and you're going to keep it untagged. Make sure you keep it untagged, unless you're tagging it with VLANs. But for my setup, it's untagged interface 1.2, which is client facing. Everything else is default. Go to the server VLAN, do the same thing, add 1.1 untagged, and that's it. You got your 2 VLANs configured. That's all, but that's the first step. You have to configure the VLANs. Then you go to the interfaces. Actually, you go to, let's go check the interface list, because I don't think you need to configure anything on that. You'll just have to confirm that your 1.1 and 1.2 is up. Yeah, I didn't configure anything here. Everything is default. You'll have to go self IP then and start IPing the client side and the server side. So the client side you're going to create, self IP, create. You create the client side IP with the segment that we have, 10.1.1.10. 10.1.1.10. And the other side is 10.1.1. The client side is 10.1.1.10 and the server side is 10.0.0.10. All right, client side facing v3 is 10.1.1.10. Mask, you need to select this guy, VLAN, out of this. Once you create the VLAN, it will show up here, and everything else is default. Do this, and once you get the IP done, you go do the same thing on the 10.0.0 segment. Make sure you select the VLAN that you created, IP it. Once that is done, you're done with the IPs, and you can test the IPs now by pinging from both sides. So before you ping, you can go to the F5 console and start pinging, but what I did was I created a virtual server. So once your network is done, this is about all you need to do on the network: self IP, VLANs. Self IP and VLANs. Once the network is done, you will go to your LTM, local traffic, and create virtual server. You'll create a pool, but what I did was I created a virtual server, one for IPv6, the other one for IPv4, and I created the virtual server pool, v1, v2, based on our diagram. Here's our diagram, v1, v2, the 2 servers, 10.0.0.1, 10.0.0.2, and my v3 is a client with 10.1.1.3 and IPv6 addresses on the client side, and this is my IPv6 segment. So I am going to be, once I do the demo of IPv4 LTM, I would do a demo of IPv6 LTM / NAT64. 2 aspects of this video. Okay. You create a pool, and source could be anything. This is any. Type is standard. Here's your virtual IP. Destination IP as virtual IP is when your clients are reaching this. You can make this up. So I just said 123.1.1.1. If you are trying to reach this, the F5 is going to service all ports, and he's going to change this into the internal IPs. Everything else I think is default. This is your virtual IP, all ports, TCP, basic. You got to go here to select the pool that you created. Once you select this and update it, you're done. That's all it takes for your setup to work. Now this guy is going to do SSH, and he's going to hit V1 and V2 in a round robin fashion. And where am I choosing that in terms of how it's going to be done? policies. So you see how you can choose the policy or the algorithm in terms of whether it's round robin or other by going to pools and make sure you don't have to, but if you select the monitoring, I just selected gateway ICMP, it'll show you green, otherwise it's going to show you blue. So you can select anything you want, but I select the gateway ICMP. And in the members, you have these V1, V2, and here's your round robin, load balancing method, round robin, or whatever you want to choose. These are some of the metrics or algorithms F5 has. We'll just work on round robin, but this is where you choose it. All right, so that's all it takes for F5 to do round robin load balancing. Let's go and check our V1. This is server 1, server 2, and this is server 3, and the V5, F5 big IP is in the middle. So you would naturally configure a default route on your client side VIOS to go towards the F5. So your static route, default route going towards F5's interface. Same thing here. You have to make sure you have your default routes configured. Default route going towards the F5. IP route. Default route configured to F5 interface. Right? So now on this guy, since we configured our VIP to be 123, I can ping the VIP, but this is not going to the servers, the V1 and V2 VIOSes. Now, the trick for SSH to test the SSH load balancing, because I'm not using any web servers and client, I'm trying to make it as simple as possible, is to use this script. I've got two scripts, so if I show you the go SSH, which is IPv4, you can see that I have a script that says SSH-O and all of this beautiful stuff. And here's the VIP address, VIOS at 123.111.1. That's all you need in the script. You also, since we're SSHing, you have to make sure that you have enabled SSH. So show system service. Edit system service. Show, and here you're going to make sure that you enable access control allow user VIOS. The command for that is set service SSH access control allow user VIOS. Enter commit on both the server side so that it can take the SSH requests. So default route and SSH enabled on the server side. That's all. And on the client side, you have this script that you would run to reach the VIP on the F5, and the F5 is going to translate that VIP into NAT that VIP or load balance that VIP into these two servers. Okay, let's test that. I'm going to run the script in my bash VIOS bash shell by saying go SSH. Here's my V2. And here's my V1. So it's load balancing, right? So that's your, if you don't use the script, your SSH is only going to go to the first one and it's going to, start puking on the second one. So you have to tell it not to check the host keys. Now that was your LTM, so simple, right? Now let's go, and IPv6 NAT64 is also very straightforward. So let's go configure. So for IPv6, obviously the first path is that your client would have an IPv6 address. In my case, it's 1::1/64, and it would have a default route, and the way to configure that default route is configure set protocols static route 6, and like this, and then the next hop, which is this is the address for my big IP F5. Once you put this in with commit, your default route is ready. Okay, that's your IPv6 default route. Now let's go to so IPv6 is only required on this portion of the setup, this portion only, because you're translating IPv6 into IPv4 on this side. And you're basically doing LTM and NAT64. So you configured an IPv6 default route here, and v6 address as well, v6 address here, and your WIP is going to be 123::1, just like the IPv4 WIP, right? And let's go and see what F5 configuration looks like. So you go to you have the VLANs and interfaces configured. So now you got to go to the self IP, and for that you're going to go network, self IP, and here's your IPv6 for the client facing. And this is kind of a little tricky. Your IPv6 address is 1::10, and you got to put in this mask for a /64, exactly how it is shown here. It's basically the fox, and so on and so forth is basically a 255 because it's a 128-bit number. That's how it looks like IPv6 address, okay? Your address, your mask, your tunnel is obviously this client side, and that's about it. That's once you do the IPv6 address on the interface, and you go to LTM, and then you go to virtual servers, and you create an IPv6 WIP, IPv6 virtual server, performance L4, source ::/0. This is your WIP right here. This is how it's going to look like with colons. Service all ports. We're just going to use test SSH with IPv6 as well, and basic TCP. Everything else is by default, but you will have to go into an advanced mode here, and you're going to have to go enable address translation, port translation by going into the advanced mode. And you're going to have to enable NAT64. This is not enabled by default. NAT64 translation, you need to go in. Address translation, port translation, you need to go in and enable that in the advanced configuration. Once you do that, that's about it. You would now obviously go and select your pool for IPv6. You create it, and then you select it, same set of servers, update it, and that's it. You would go back to your V1, V2, V3, and then test out your IPv6. So you go back to your bash shell and your script is there. Your script, it looks exactly like this IPv4 script, except that it's got an IPv6 address. Look at the difference. Exactly the same thing, except that this one has an IPv4 address and this one has an IPv6 address, web address, okay? Now you go back and run the IPv6 and you're in V2 and you're in V1. Bingo. So that is how you would configure F5 LTM with NAT64. Obviously, the Big 5 has a lot of features, and so I wanted to test out the NAT, which is so easy, and the LTM, which is also very easy. For GTM, you're going to have to go DNS. It's you need the licensing and the setup for that. But this basic F5 installation configuration is pretty straightforward once you get over with the licensing and reading through the documentation. You can really do this and develop a skill set on F5 installation and LTM's configuration. Hope this helps.